Hello, welcome to the Bradford Literature Festival. And I should say, a big welcome to the one and only John Barnes, eh? Now, just looking into the audience, I can see somebody wearing a shirt there that looks a lot baggier than the one that when you were wearing it many years ago, that grey one, if you remember that. I remember
it won't be baggy on
Barnes.
me now, I can tell you, it'll be tight.
Yeah. Well, listen, we had John came in 2019, and it was a fabulous event. And since then, John has been not just, talking about football. He's also been exploring the worlds about race and what racism means as well. So we're going to have a bit of a conversation today about, obviously, his career, because I think a lot of us want to talk about that, but also about some of his thoughts on racism in society and in football as well. So I'm just going to kick off, John, by saying Liverpool season. Yeah, Liverpool season. Was it
I could talk for an hour on that, couldn't I?
Well,
of course
maybe
it was a success.
Was it a success or
a failure? Of course
it was,
and it's not just Liverpool season, is it? I mean, if you look at what Jurgen Klopp has done in the last 3 years, it's just been incredible. It's been a roller coaster of consistency. Unfortunately, Manchester City have also been very consistent. But if you look at what we did last year in losing the league by 1 point, losing the Champions League final and winning 2 trophies, it's an incredible year. He just brought a level of consistency. And ourselves and Manchester City are far and away the 2 best teams in the country in terms of the consistency shown. You've seen Chelsea now and again, and of course, Man United have got the potential, could have got great players, but the harmony isn't right. The fact that they haven't given a manager the power to make decisions means that they are where they are, but long may that continue.
And there's probably a lot of Liverpool fans in here now who are a bit worried about Sadio Mane leaving, and looks like Salah might go as well.
Well, I mean, they're worried when Dalglish left, when Rush left, I left, everyone. But if it continues, you support the club, and they replace them. And that's the most important thing. You have to love the club, and because players come and players go, what are you going to do? And we've signed Nunez, we've got some other players. I mean, Jota is still there. We've signed other players as well. So, no, and Jurgen Klopp, the most important person, is signed for another 2 years. So players, we love them while they're here, but when they're not there anymore, we lost Gini Wijnaldum, and we continued. If Salah goes, we'll continue.
That's fair enough. I do remember when Ian Rush left. I was at his last game at Anfield. It was against Watford. And then you signed. I think it was you,
and then Rushy came back.
Aldridge,
but look, as I
Beardsley.
said, but that's football, because when people spoke about Keegan leaving, they thought when Keegan left and then Dalglish came, then Dalglish retired. It's not important. You love the players while they're here, and they give 100% commitment, determination, humility, and all the Liverpool players play with that determination. So if Salah is going to go, even if he stays for another year and goes on a free transfer, you know what you're going to get out of him. You know that he's going to give 100% commitment to Liverpool. Then if he goes, he goes. So, it doesn't bother me. You want players who want to stay and want to play, and I have no animosity towards players who want to go, because, they do what they want to do. But all I demand is while they're at the football club, they perform. Not just in terms of their performances, but in terms of their attitude. And that's where I think, if you're in the Man United fans here, that's the problem with Manchester United. The players who have not wanted to be there, while they're there, they haven't performed. They've had a bad attitude. And as I said, I'll use Gini Wijnaldum as an example. He knew he was going to go. Liverpool weren't going to give him what he wanted, but he still gave 100%, and that's all you ask.
And I suppose this is we'll get onto other stuff in a minute, but I suppose the real thing is to understand next season. Have you got any predictions? Who's going to who's going to win the league?
Listen. It's between ourselves and Man City.
Yeah,
that's for the league. As far as cup matches go, you can never tell, because of course, you say when fans talk about having a good cup run before the season starts, you don't know who you're going to play. So if you are a Leicester supporter and you say, let's have a good cup run, and in the third round you play Man City away or Liverpool away in the FA Cup, you're probably not going to go through. So the only thing is guaranteed in terms of what is going to happen is that you're going to play these teams in the league. So you know what you should do. So I would think that Liverpool and Man City will be first and second in whichever position it is, and they play with consistency. We had an incredible cup run last year and getting to the Champions League final, and winning 2 cups. But to say, you should win a trophy is crazy. The only thing that is that in the league, we're going to play them home and away, so where should we finish? Yeah. So, but Liverpool have been consistent throughout in all competitions, because they don't prioritise cup matches, be it the FA Cup, the League Cup, the Champions League, or the league. They play football matches, which means, can we win this football match? Yeah. And it happens to be a league match, it happens to be a cup, it happens to be a Champions League match, and they've done it. Because they have not prioritized and said one is more important than the other, as some teams do, which is why they went to the wire in all competitions, and they'll do that again next year. Not to say they're even going to win a trophy, but that come the latter stages of the season, they'll be there or thereabouts.
Now, obviously you won a lot of trophies in your career, but how did it all start then for you? Would I mean, obviously, if you can find all this stuff you've written about it and talked about it before, it's in the book.
Well, I'll tell you how it starts.
Yeah.
It started as a young boy growing up in Jamaica, and I'm not talking about football. I'm talking about my life, because the football didn't start, then my life did. The culmination of that meant that I came to England and played football when I was 17. But I'll just tell you a bit about my life. My mother's family are a very political family. They were instrumental in starting the first Jamaican government in independence. My grandfather Frank and his brother Ken, alongside Alexander Bustamante, who was one of the prime ministers, and Norman Manley, Michael Manley's father, the first British prime minister. They started the first Jamaican government. What then happened was that they felt, this is my grandfather and his brother Ken Hill, while they were part of the PNP, the first political party, they felt that after independence, and Norman Manley took over as prime minister, they felt that the government was not going to be representative of the average working class person. So they broke away from that party and started the first trade unions. So they were socialists. They believe in, and that is why when you look at race or discrimination, it is not just about race, it's not just about gender, it's about discrimination of disenfranchised people based on what we've been wrongly told about them. So whilst we assumed that once we become independent, and it's going to be a black-led government of black people, then everything is going to be okay, we're going to have equality. But we didn't, because that's when you have to look at the nuances around class, around privilege. So therefore, that is the way I've been brought up since I've been born. That's my mother's family. My father joined the British West Indies Regiment, the army, as an officer. And he came to Sandhurst in the 50s. At Sandhurst, his classmate was Andrew Parker Bowles. That's Camilla's ex-husband. That's the future Queen's ex-husband. So he was friendly with Andrew Parker Bowles. Then in 1976, when I was 13, my father got sent to England from Jamaica as the military attaché, so he was a diplomat. And when he came in 1976, Andrew Parker Bowles regularly would come to our house for dinner. His wife wasn't with him. We don't know where she was, but my dad said, don't ask questions. Why I'm going around this roundabout way of telling you about this story is because when people want to talk about your experiences and the way we view discrimination, be it race, be it class, be it gender, we assume that all black people have the same experiences. So who knows? Anyone from London? Okay, well, you know London. So when we came, we lived in Mayfair. My dad had a chauffeur. I'm black. I'm from a privileged middle-class family in Jamaica whose family started the first Jamaican government. My dad was at Sandhurst with the upper crust of British society where Winston Churchill went to Sandhurst, but I'm black. So therefore, how disenfranchised was I with a chauffeur and living in Mayfair? So this is my experience. So I completely empathize with every other black youngster or footballer when I came to England who may have been made to feel less than because of his experiences, be it Ian Wright or somebody else who may have grown up in a council house, his father can't get a job, whatever it is. But then, from I was a young age, I felt fully worthy and equal to anybody. So therefore, when I say racism didn't affect me, it didn't, because how could I I remember being at a football match when I was 17, and you have some people throwing bananas at me when I was playing for Watford. And I thought I couldn't identify and calling me names. Yeah, we know what names they're calling me. And I couldn't identify with the person they're calling me. I know I'm black, but I couldn't identify with that uncivilized, in terms of what he's considering me to be, unworthy, less than person, because my life never showed me that. Now, as I said, I completely empathize with any other black person because I know how difficult it is for them. But for me, I was a privileged person, so I understood that. So therefore I would never, ever talk about how terrible it is for me, because my life has never been terrible. Because when I was 17 years old, okay, I got racist abuse and a banana came on the field, but at 17 years old, when I was playing for Watford and England at 19, after that banana came on the field, I got into a nice coach, went home to my nice big house. I went to Downing Street to meet who I did it. I went to the front of the queue in a restaurant or in a bar or into the best hotels, and the people who are abusing me can't even spell their own name and get in. So who is superior? So how could I be made to feel that way? Now, so what I always felt was, I remember playing against Arsenal, and it happened to be Arsenal. So please, Arsenal fans, don't say I'm saying Arsenal fans are racist, because Liverpool fans racially abused me when I played for Watford. This is the way it was. So let's not pretend. That's the way it was. Then when I played for Liverpool, they loved me. But there you go. And as I'm driving up the Holloway Road on the coach with Watford on a Saturday at 5 o'clock after the game, going back up to Watford, Holloway Road up onto the A1, and you have some fans throwing stuff at the buses, and I'm on the bus, but I'm on the bus having a nice, meal and a glass of wine, and Luther Bliss is there with me, and people are now saying how terrible it is for me on that coach drinking a glass of wine and eating a fillet steak. And interspersed amongst all of these hooligans, football hooligans, a lot of them are racist National Front members, are the average black person going along their day on a Saturday at 5 o'clock, hiding in the corner, cowering in streets because they're scared for their lives. And who speaks for them? Who says how terrible it is for them? And we've continued to see that today when we talk about how terrible it is for black footballers or black actors who can't get Oscars, while neglecting what's going on in the inner cities in terms of jobs and education for the average black person, if we don't talk about black, and no one speaks for them. We say what we need more black men with Oscars and black managers, and as much as, yes, you look at how disproportionate the fact that there are 30% black footballers and less than 1% black managers, but for those 1% black managers who can't get a job, of which I am one, I still I'm fine. I've got a nice house, I've got a nice car, I've got money. Who's speaking for the disenfranchised average person? A black person who can't get a job, can't get a house. And this is why you have to look at the nuances, not just about race, but also about class, because a group of people we neglect and we forget about are white working class people who live on the streets, who can't get a job and houses and feed their families either. And we're trying to frame it as a black and a white thing. And it's not, yes, that is an issue, but it's also to do with lots of other aspects of it. So to ask me where I came from, that is where I came from. As much as I could play football, so I became a footballer.
But it must have been tough, though. I remember I was a steward at Wembley at university when you were playing in the early 90s, and if you remember some of those games, I was in fear of my life because the racism. They seemed to spend more time saying no surrender to the IRA and booing you every time you got the ball.
Exactly.
It must have been tough. That's 80, 90,000.
Because you're in there, aren't you?
Yeah.
I'm on the pitch.
Yeah.
So what's happening to me? Has anybody ever come on the pitch and done anything to me? No. But for my friends who are in the stands...
Yeah.
It was tough for them.
What was it like, though? I mean, I know you're saying that did you really block it out? I've often wondered what it was like when 90,000 people were booing you. Well, not 90,000, but
it didn't bother me at all. It didn't bother me at all. I remember having this conversation with my white teammates in the 80s.
Yeah.
And I used to say to them, if I was to call you a white son, so they'd go, and? How can that make me feel inferior because you bring it to my attention that I'm white? Because, of course, white is superior. So you go, you white son? So it's like, well, that's not an insult. Well, that's not an insult. Now, as I said, because of their experience and their perception of what white means to them. Yeah? So I understand completely what the negative aspects of black means in terms of the language that's used, in terms of the everyday experiences of black people. But my experiences were different because, as I said, I had a chauffeur when I was young. I lived in Mayfair. And the people who feel superior to me live in a council house in the East End and can't get a job. So how can they make me feel that they're better than me? Now, as I said, I completely empathize with any black person who goes through whatever they go through. But that's not me. And that is why ever since then, and what I won't do is I won't capitalize on negative aspects of blackness. Meaning, as a footballer, a banana comes on the field, I will not capitalize on those negative aspects of blackness without enduring the everyday reality of being black. And I don't, because I live in a nice house in a village and my kids go to private school and I can go down the street and people come up and ask my autograph, and then all of a sudden when a banana comes on the field, I'm then going to say, oh, my life is terrible. And I'll tell you why that is counterproductive. Why it's counterproductive? Because the biggest allies of any disenfranchised group in the last 400 years, originally, the biggest allies were white working class people. Yeah? You look at even in indentured servants, in the times of slavery, you had white working class people who were not going through what the slaves went through, but they were very similar, and they identified with them. Now, all of a sudden, we're saying to white working class people, we're saying to them that they have got white privilege, which they have, but they don't understand it. And we are not explaining it in the right way. When we talk about white privilege, I would say to a white working class person or a white homeless person, how can you identify with being privileged because he's white? He can't. But what I'd say to him is that anything negative in your life that you go through, and there are lots, you can't get a job, you can't get a house, you're on the streets, it's not because you're white. It's because of the class, because of your, whatever it is, but it's nothing to do with your color. Yeah? But he still can't feel the benefit of that. So, but how do we explain it to him? And how we explain it to him is we then look at after the champions, the European Championships, when those 3 black players missed the penalty, and they then got racist abuse on Twitter, and you say to these white homeless people that you're luckier than them. You're luckier than Sacco, and you're luckier than them because they're getting abused for missing penalties. And then the very next day after missing those penalties, 3 of them on a private plane going to Monaco on their phones, drinking champagne, saying how terrible their life was because they got abused, and on a private plane.
I was going to
how
ask
can
you
they
about
identify with that? So the point I'm making is that, and they have every right to do that. They've got millions, so they can do that. It's not a problem. but they don't endure the everyday reality of blackness. Now, what I'd say to them is that if you want to explain white privilege to the white working class people, say to the white working class people, you say everything negative in your life that you go through, as much as it's not because you're white, but everything negative in your life, black working class people go through the exact same thing, as well as having the added detrimental effect of the perception of them because they're black. Now, even if they don't believe the thing about the perception of them being black, but they'll say, well, if they're going through what we're going through in this life, we will empathize with them. How can I empathize with somebody who's on 500, 300 grand a week on a private plane because a banana comes on the field? And we're now creating a division between the people who should be our allies. And the same thing happens from a female perspective, because it's not just about, and it's intersectional, but it's not just about race, it's about class, it's about gender. And we have to be honest. And why it's called the uncomfortable truth, because we know, and I hold my hand up, that when a female referee walks on the field, my initial reaction is that I think a man will be better. Why is that? Because of the way I've been conditioned to think. And we've all been conditioned to think in terms of hierarchy, be it race, gender, class, north-south divide. And instead of coming down hard on the people who get caught, we should challenge the environment that we live in that makes us think that way. Because you're talking about now, you look what's going on in Rwanda, and I'm not talking about sending people to Rwanda, I'm talking about us complaining about human rights in Rwanda, about freedom of speech and expression. And we're saying Rwanda is a terrible country because of a lack of freedom of speech and expression. And say you should be allowed freedom of speech and expression. But of course, here, you're not allowed freedom of speech because you can't, not that you should, but let's just talk about it from a geopolitical point of view. You can't racially abuse anybody on the football field. But I thought we have freedom of speech here. But you can't do that. But who are the people doing that? Some 15-year-old white working class boy who has no influence over the systemic bias that's here. So let's come down hard on that point and give the illusion that we're making a difference, because if anybody racially abused somebody on the pitch, it's going to be on the front pages. That's the problem with the world. That's the problem with England. Let's get rid of them. We're doing a great job. But we have a prime minister who can call Muslim women letterboxes, and nothing's done. Nothing's done. So therefore, what we have to do is we have to think we are giving the illusion that we're trying to do something by coming down on the inconsequential people. White working class football fans, they're the problem. But you look what's happening at the higher echelons of society and what goes on, and we're not tackling that. And then we're being invited as the black leaders into these positions, and then when we're in these positions, we're the ones now, and the black community are going to look at us and say, yes, you're going to talk for us, you're going to speak for us, you're going to tell them what it is, because too often white middle class men have been saying that this is the problem. We want black people now in these positions because we need black people to tell us what the problem is. So when we put a black person in that position, Dr. Tony Sewell, and then you ask about racial disparities, racial discrimination in institutions, and he then says that there is no racial discrimination, no systemic racial bias in this country. There are individual aspects, but no systemic racial bias. How can we then complain and say that, white people, if we have our own telling us that, what do we then think? And that is why the solution to the problem is not to get more black people into these positions, because they'll be part of an institution that discriminates. So therefore, if he's going to tell the truth, he won't be in that position to begin with, because we've seen lots of black players now taking the knee because how terrible it is. Yeah, who are they taking the knee for? They may talk about George Floyd, they may talk about racist football fans throwing things on the pitch. I haven't heard one of them say, where are the black managers? Have anyone said, where are the black managers? Because they have to be very careful who they criticize. So criticize Eastern European and some white racist fans here. And secondly, when you talk about equality and discrimination, I don't hear any one of them talking about, where are the Asian footballers? Where are the Asian footballers? Have we had anybody talking about that? But it's terrible in Eastern Europe because they throw bananas on the field. So therefore, we're given the illusion that we're doing something and we're not. And I don't blame them, because A, they may not understand it, and also they're looking after themselves. And I say to these black footballers who are taking a knee for racial discrimination because of, racial discrimination in Eastern Europe and the bananas come on the field, I'll say, what do you want to be? Do you want to be a football manager? You better start now addressing that issue of why there are no black football managers, if you want to be a manager in 10 years. And secondly, in a country whereby we may have 3.5 to probably 3.5% black people and over 4% Asians, and where are the Asian footballers? And who's talking about the fact that there are no Asian footballers, but we're fighting for equality? No, we're not. We're fighting for ourselves. And that is why this is a very intersectional book, to talk about the fact that from a female perspective, from a gay perspective, from a racial perspective, from a political perspective, we all have to empathize with each other and come together. Kamala Harris, forget her. Cressida Dick, Chief of Police. She's a woman. She can do nothing to change things for women because she's part of an environment that discriminates against women. And they feel that, let's get a woman in position and then things will change. Kamala Harris in America is the same thing. Obama, he was black. He can't change anything because this is the way that the institutions, this is the way that the establishment is. So I'm not talking about a revolution to change it, but we have to understand it because we're being kidded if we feel that what we're doing now is fighting for equality. Because we're not doing that. We're giving the illusion, and we're just giving enough for people not to ask questions, which is what Boris does. He's gone now to Rwanda because he doesn't want to answer questions about the by-elections and stuff like that, hoping it'll go away. And from a racial or from a perspective of discrimination generally, be it gender, because as I said, the vast majority of men in here, me included, when a female referee walks onto the field, we think a man will be better, because of how we have been wrongly conditioned to think. And the most important thing is for us to own up to it and admit it within ourselves, then we can change. But we don't. We wait for some idiot to shout out, point the finger at him and say, he's the problem. He's the problem. And once we get rid of him, everything will be okay. That is not the solution. And Martin Luther King said, before you ask me some more questions, in 1963, he said, it is the shallow understanding of racial bias. And for that, you could add gender, sexuality, religious, but the shallow understanding of racial bias by good people is the problem, which is us. It is not the total misunderstanding by bad people. Now, the total misunderstanding by bad people is the football fans who throw a banana on the field, is the man who wears a pointy hat from the Ku Klux Klan, and we think they're the problem. They're not the problem. We are the problem, because we believe that as long as we don't throw a banana on the field, we're not racist. I wouldn't rape a woman, we're not sexist. I wouldn't beat up somebody who's gay, I'm not homophobic. We all are to a certain degree based on how we've been conditioned to think, and we have to challenge it within ourselves to be truthful and honest. Then we can start moving forward.
I feel like a right back in the 1980s is just seeing John Barnes run past him every 5 seconds.
Right back are very important as well. Look at Trent Alexander. So don't have a go at the right backs. They're very important.
No. You talk to a central defender and a right back for far too long. But John, so basically, just picking up on some of those things you said. I mean, does that mean then when you think about the conversations that we're having now, we hear about with Black Lives Matter, the taking of the knee, just a general kind of it's become a bigger deal now than when it was when you were playing at your peak, and I would argue you're getting way more abuse than some of the people are getting now. Do you have a problem with them, or do you think that is it just I just have a different political opinion? That's all.
30 years ago, when they started passing the red card down the line in the Champions League, say no to racism. Here we are 30 years later, and they're still doing it, and nothing has changed. Taking a knee, I haven't got a problem with taking a knee. Taking a knee changes nothing. It starts the conversation. Why are we taking a knee? Then we have to move on from that, because what can happen? We could still be taking a knee in 20 years and thinking that's enough, because that's all we're doing now. And in many respects, the conversation isn't why are we taking a knee. The conversation is, should we or shouldn't we? I think we should. I think we shouldn't. The conversation as to why we initially took the knee, because of course what will happen, a lot of disingenuous people will then look at that and then use it for different reasons and say, well, I don't agree with it. And these are people, by the way, some of them, not all of them, if you don't believe in not taking it, it's fine. But I know a lot of people, and I'm not saying football fans are thicker than anybody else, but we do have a lot of people who don't understand lots of stuff. And a lot of them are saying, oh no, because it's about Marxism. I said, they can't even spell Marxism. They don't know what Marxism is. But use it as an excuse not to then say, I don't want to take the knee. And we know the reason why they're doing it. It's about defunding the police. Defunding the police. Why do people, it's not even about, in fact, Marxism is not about defunding the police. Marxism is, when you talk about, poverty is the main reason for crime. So if you get rid of poverty, you reduce crime greatly. You reduce crime greatly, you don't need as much police. Yeah? So it's about poverty and getting rid of crime. But of course, you can skip out those 2 points and say defunding. So people use it for their own gain. Does
that have a place, though, in sport?
What?
People, all the things you're talking about what taking the knee is all about.
Where sport has a place, because it can influence people. But if it influences people, in the right way, and it does it in a way that is tangible. So taking a knee doesn't influence people at all. If you're just taking a knee, if you're doing nothing else. I'll tell you what influences people and what sport can do. And you talk about sports and politics shouldn't mix. Marcus Rashford changed government policy towards school dinners. Yeah? You know what Marcus Rashford could have done? Marcus Rashford could go, there's £250,000, 1 week wages, go and buy something. But he didn't do that, did he? He used his voice to change government policy. But what footballers are using their voice to is to try and get a 15-year-old football fan banned and try and get people in Montenegro banned. If they use their voice to talk about, yes, racism in football is bad, bananas are coming on the field, but what's going on in inner cities? Why can't our kids get an education? Marcus Rashford said, why can't our kids get food? And you embarrass them, and because you have that voice. So use that voice for something tangible. But all they're using their voices for is when we have something in Montenegro, a racist football fan or some 12-year-old boy, or somebody sexually abuses abuses the female referee, we spend pages and pages saying how terrible that individual person is, who is inconsequential to the real systemic bias that happens. So if you want to use your voice for that, to really make a difference. So, as I said, Wilfred Zaha doesn't take a knee. I don't have a problem with people taking a knee or not taking a knee, but we're kidding ourselves if we think just by taking the knee we're going to solve any problems. It starts the conversation. Now, why are we taking a knee? Because of systemic bias, be it religious, be it gender, right? What next? How can we stop this? But we're not talking about that. All we're talking about is he should take the knee. He shouldn't take the knee. He should take the knee. And as I said, if you look at us passing that red card down the line for the last 30 years, players now don't even know why they're doing it. They just go. And now all of a sudden they'll go, take the knee, yeah, head up and we play. They're doing it without even thinking, why are we taking a knee and what is the next step?
Well, I mean, some of them probably know, but you're right, yeah. And the Wilfred Zaha.
Well, if they know, they take a knee, but I don't hear them from Monday to Friday talking about where they're taking a knee. Come Saturday, they'll say, yes, we're going to take a knee and we're going to take a knee for that. But Monday to Friday, they go along their everyday lives.
Do you think they
So
should
it's not
stop
part-time. No, well, I don't care whether they do or not. But if you really want to pretend or you really want to say you're making a difference, and you can, as Marcus Rashford did, don't just do it when the camera's on you to take a knee. And then what happens to the next game you take a knee? If you really are interested, and I can tell you the most of them aren't. They aren't. 100% they aren't. Because if they say tomorrow, right, we're not taking the knee anymore, they won't take the knee. So even with Gareth, and I like Gareth. Gareth's a modern manager. But this is the situation. What do you believe the right thing to do is? That's the important thing. Now, if tomorrow we come in and say we're not going to take the knee anymore, Gareth Southgate in England would stop taking the knee. I thought it's the right thing to do. But if we decide it's wrong, that we're not going to do it anymore, we won't do it. And secondly, if all black players stop taking a knee, all white players will start taking a knee. Now, are they doing it because they're going to support their black teammates, or they think it's the right thing to do? And for me, the most important thing is the authenticity in what you do. If you think it's the right thing to do, do it. Don't just do it because I've got to do it because he does it, and we're being told to do it.
Okay, well, you mentioned Gareth there. Gareth Southgate, and of course, obviously, England manager. We've got the World Cup coming up, not far from now. I suppose a couple of questions. One is, how well do you think England will do? And then secondly, I suppose that goes into that bigger, deeper question as well, is actually, should we be having the World Cup there in the first place?
Well, first of all, in cup matches, it's very important to look at the draw. So when we got to the semi-finals of the World Cup, 6 years ago, whenever it was, we played Sweden in the quarterfinals, in the last 8.
Croatia.
And Croatia. No, we lost to Croatia.
Then we lost in the semi.
Yeah, but the teams that we beat, we're fortunate. Now, if you look at when we got to the final this year, if you look at one half of the draw, there's Spain, Portugal, France, Belgium, Italy. Our hardest game was against Germany. So we got to the final. Yeah, because our hardest game was against Germany. So once again, he said, how well can we do? Now, the way football now is in the World Cup is that the group seedings and the groups are designed for the top teams to get to the quarterfinals. So therefore, from the seeding point of view, yes, we'll get there. But if all of a sudden the seeding goes a bit wrong and we finish second instead of first in a group, or another team finish second against first, then in the quarterfinals we're going to play against France, they can beat us and we lose in the quarterfinals, or the last 8. So in World Cups, I don't then say, or in cup competitions, I don't think we should get to the final or semi-final, because you have to see who you're playing. And I don't think in the Euros when we got to the final, had we been in the other half of the group where we'd had to have beaten Italy, then we'd have beaten Spain, then we'd have beaten Belgium, we'd have to beat those teams to get through. I don't think we'd have got through. But what he has done is maximize the potential of what he has. Because, of course, it is a very British thing to think that we're the best because we're Britain. We have never been the best. When we got to the semi-finals in 1990, that's as best as we could, because there were more than 5 teams better than us. And, in fact, if you look at that 1990 World Cup, we beat Belgium, and they should have beaten us in that game. We won 1-0 and Gaza scored, but we won, and we go through, because that can happen. Against Cameroon, we were 2-0 down. They were very nice. We beat them 3-2. Then in the semi-final, the best game we played was against Germany, and we should have won that game, and we lost. So in cup matches, it's difficult, as I said. But all Gareth does is maximize the potential of the team. And people think we should be winning because we've got Sterling, we've got these players. But if you look at the strength of the Premier League, what is the strength of the Premier League? with the foreign players. Look at Liverpool, look at Man City with De Bruyne and what they have, Mahrez, and look at all the teams. But we believe that we should. So Gareth maximizes the potential of the team. One thing I would say is that Gareth is a modern manager who massages people's egos, and when everything's going well, it's fine. So in England, are playing well, you go out and you play, you allow the players to play with freedom. When all of a sudden it's going wrong, adversity, sticky patches, where you need a manager to shout and scream and tell players off and move them around, as Klopp does, as Guardiola does, as Tuchel does. Gareth doesn't do that. So it's really up to the players to play. Gareth isn't necessarily going to inspire them when we're playing badly and we need a change, we need a rocket, we need to kick up the backside.
There is that argument that the quiet kind of tactician, but you don't think that really works then? Because remember there was a thing about
you have to be able to do
yeah.
both. You have to be able to do both. Because, yes, that's fine when everything's going well, but when things aren't going well, and you see Klopp get up and he substitutes a superstar after half an hour because you're not doing it, or Tuchel or Guardiola, and he shouts at them and screams at them, most of the time you don't need that. But when things aren't going well, maybe that's what you need. And that is why I never feel safe with England when they go behind or they're not playing well, to say, can we come out of that? Because all the time that we've done well is always when we've been playing well, we've won, we've not come up against any adversity at all, then all of a sudden we play in the semi-final, we lose, or the final, we lose. But in games, when all of a sudden we're not playing well, as we've seen in the last 4 games, when we need a manager to stand up and he goes pointing and go, you, run around, do that, try, I'm taking you off, change things. Gareth doesn't do that. So if everything goes well, I think we'll be okay. But it's just a question of, if things aren't going well, how do we come out of that?
Well, 4 years ago we had the World Cup. We had glory. It coincided with the festival. We had all that glorious weather. This year, obviously, it's going to be later in the year in Qatar. I mean, there are all sorts of reasons why it's happening, and there've been all sorts of conversations about whether it should be happening as well. I mean, what do you think about that, John?
Well, I think that we should be accountable and to the highest authority in the land. The highest authority in the land. Whatever the highest authority in the land do, we are able to do. Now, I'm going to go on to, I'll talk about that in a minute, but I'll go on to something similar, Saudi Arabia. People talk about Newcastle and Saudi Arabia. As soon as this war started, where was Boris Johnson going? To Saudi Arabia to do business. So if the highest moral authority in the land, should be our government, can do business in Saudi Arabia, why can't Newcastle? Why can't we go to Qatar? Now, once again, we're actually judging this by our own standards in terms of morality, in terms of what we consider human rights to be and human rights abuses. I've worked in Qatar, and they're working towards changing a culture, which is going to take time in terms of what we would consider to be human right and human rights abuses. As I mentioned, one there about freedom of speech, which when it suits us to support freedom of speech, we do. And when it suits us to hit somebody over the head with the brick about human rights abuses or freedom of speech, we don't. I mentioned Rwanda. International law. There's supposed to be no human being, as far as international law, which we wrote. International law is not written by China and India and Russia. It's written by us, and they have to sign up to it, to be left stateless. But what were we doing with Jemima Begum? Regardless of whether you believe in what she did or not, regardless of whether you believe she should go to prison or not, we have absolved ourselves of responsibility. And through some loophole, by finding some Canadian way she could be part of Canada, which obviously came as a shock to Canada. So we quickly got rid of her and then said, oh, she's going to be Canadian. Canada went, she can't be one of us. Oh, flipping out when law says it can. So when we choose international law and to break international law, Northern Ireland Protocol, when we sign up to something. But when anybody else, be it Russia, China, India, signs up to an agreement and it breaks the agreement, they're terrible. But when we do it, then we do it equally as well. Equally
so you think
much.
that if that's the case, then we can't have any, it's not, there's no
well,
point.
If the government are going to say, you can't have the World Cup there, well, don't do business with them then. And then maybe we'll do that. But you can't have it both ways. You can't be asking individual institutions or other, private companies not to do business either with Qatar or Saudi Arabia. And we're making billions by sending them weapons or buying their own, whatever it is.
Well, while we're on the subject of those kind of like nation states like that, then a lot of them obviously, you talk Newcastle, one of your old clubs, bought by effectively the government of Saudi Arabia. Mm-hmm. Same with Manchester City, PSG, etc. I mean, is it right? Is it ruining football? Or is it just making it a lot of people just wealthier?
Well, that's why I look at football fans. I said, football fans, what do you want? Now, this can't happen in other countries. In Germany, there's no outside company that can own more than 51%, 49% of a company. So therefore, they keep it. Of course, you can have sponsors and stuff like that. So therefore, it is much more regulated. But in this country, it's not. It's not regulated. And as much as we want to complain, how many Newcastle fans would then all of a sudden be cheering up, jumping up and down because they're bought by the Saudis? And do you think that Liverpool, Arsenal, Man United, Chelsea would not want to be bought by the Saudis? So of course, when it suits them, they're quite happy. So, you know, we have to be real and honest about how honourable we are and what we're allowed to happen, what we will allow to happen. So,
but can they, if you take
the
the morality to one
side,
side,
take the morality
though,
to one
John,
side. I tell you, I could solve football financial woes like that. You bring a salary cap in. Yeah? You bring a salary cap in. I was the first £10,000 a week player in the country. And people say to me now, oh, how come you want a salary cap now, blah, blah, blah. A salary cap doesn't affect the top players. If you look in America where there's a salary cap, the Tom Brady's and these superstar players, the salary cap doesn't affect them. So Kevin De Bruyne or Mo Salah, a salary cap won't affect them. Who a salary cap will affect are the average players. Because what is the problem with football from a financial point of view is that average players earning £100,000 a week is the problem, not superstars earning £300,000 a week. Because you have many more average players earning £100,000 a week. Now, because it's not regulated, you can have either the Qataris or the people from Abu Dhabi or Saudi Arabia now who can pay all their players 300 grand a week, so therefore they all go to these clubs. Now, if the salary cap meant that you can't, what will then happen? Because every club in the Premier League can afford to pay 2 players 400 grand a week. What will happen, as in American sport, is that every club will have 2 superstar players and they'll have the rest good players, so it'll be much more competitive. Whereas because it's not regulated, the players will just all go to Man City. And when people go, oh yeah, but who would want to go and play for Swindon? You pay them 400 grand a week, they would, because who would have wanted to play for Man City 10 years ago? Yeah. So money talks. So from that point of view, regardless of what the fans think, now, so therefore, I say, and you mentioned the fact, are the fans happy with people buying from Saudi Arabia, blah, blah, blah? What do the fans say? We want you to spend money. We want you to sign players. We want you to sign him for 100 million. We want you to give him, 30 million a year. Where's that money going to come from? Where's that money going to come from? We don't care. We want you to do it.
So should Liverpool pay Salah 400 grand a week?
They're not going to.
They're not going to, are they?
They're not going to.
Would you, though?
No, I wouldn't.
No?
Because then when Van Dijk's contract up, we've got to pay him 400. And then when everybody else, you've got to pay him 400. And then what's going to happen? We're still only going to finish first or second.
But who is going to pay him 400 this summer?
Well, maybe Paris Saint-Germain or maybe somebody abroad because they can afford to do that. But Liverpool, and you shouldn't do that because what happens is, and you can see when a team does that, what happens to that team? Look at Paris Saint-Germain. What have they won? They've not won a Champions League. They've got Messi, Kylian Mbappe. Because what you can't do in football, you can't separate the team. You can't have superstars and players who don't matter. Now, regardless of what you think of Liverpool and Man City, you think that Salah is more important than Andy Robertson. He's not. Klopp doesn't think that either because it's a team that has to be that way. Whereas when you get this thing whereby, so Kylian Mbappe signing this new contract now and he's going to have a say in transfers and he's going to say whatever, that's not going to help the team. That's not going to help the team. It has to be a team. And when you talk about socialism, football is the original socialist ideology from Bill Shankly's time. It was never about Dalglish and Rush. It was about Dalglish, Rush, Jimmy Kay, Sammy Lee, these other players, and they have to see themselves just like them. So, Kylian Mbappe signed this huge contract now. Now, all of a sudden, how is that going to work with the team? Because when all of a sudden Kylian Mbappe is not running around trying, the other players are going to go, hang on a second, he's on all this money, and I'm equally as good, I'm trying harder than him. That happens. And that's happened at Man United. It happened at Liverpool with Steven Gerrard and Suarez when they were there. So it has to be a situation whereby the club can't be held to ransom. And the fans who feel that they should are wrong, and I'll tell you why. Because what will happen is if you give Salah, he's now 30, coming up to 31, a 4-year contract, 400 grand a week. Yes, we've got Salah. 2 years' time, he's 33. He gets injured, he can't run around anymore because he's 33. He's not in the team because he's too old, possibly. He may not be, but we don't know. Then all of a sudden, there's a 25-year-old player we want to sign, but we can't because Salah's on 400 grand a week. And we can't bring him in because we haven't got any money. Get rid of Salah. Can't get rid of Salah. He's going nowhere. He's got a contract. You can't get rid of him. Why do we give him that in the first place? That's what fans will say. So that's why they're doing the right thing. That's why I demand, like Gini Wijnaldum, unlike Mo, because I know if Mo stays and his contract runs out next year, 100% this year, he'll be given 100%. End of story. That's all you demand. So you can't blame Mo, because Mo wants to make as much money as he can, but you can't blame the club not for bending over backwards to keep him.
No, I agree with you. I think they should let him go. They should sell him if they can this summer.
But they can't sell him, can they? Because he may decide not to go. That's the problem. Yeah. So, of course, as you say now, we should sell him this summer. If you give him a 4-year contract, in 2 years' time, you go, well, sell him. A, nobody's going to buy him at 33. And B, you can't get rid of him because you can't just...
I don't even know who will buy him, though, right now. Who's got enough money? Because apart from PSG, I don't know who's got the money.
Listen, they'll find.
Because in Spain, they're all skint.
So
I know that there's so much corruption.
So they say.
You think so?
Yeah. I think me and you should just be in the pub. Why don't we talk for what the people want to listen to instead of just what you want to talk about? Flip it now. You want to talk about Mo Salah, we've got other things to talk about.
I just asked you because of the money thing. That was all about the
No, I agree. No, it's true. So that is why football fans have to be very careful for what you wish for. Because, once again, Man City used to complain about the power of Man United because it's unfair because they got all this money through sponsorship. Then all of a sudden now they say, oh, it's okay. Newcastle the same. So when you talk about morality and stuff, listen, as I said, we are governed by the highest authority in the land, and as far as I'm concerned, it's fair game. Because this international, my wife's just done a lot of this international law and human rights, and because once again, I completely empathize, completely 100% empathize and support the Ukrainian people who are suffering. 100%. Do I support the Ukrainian government? When you have being propped up by neo-Nazis down in that region, and how now Zelensky got into power, I don't see how all of a sudden someone who would have been sanctioned 4 or 5 years ago and who is part of a government who stood up in 2016, Russia, regardless, and it's all politics, even what Russia were doing is politics as well, made a proposal to the UN to combat neo-Nazism and xenophobia. What a great proposal that is. To fight against neo-Nazism and xenophobia. That sounds like a rational proposal to me. 3 countries voted against it. Ukraine, America, and Palau. Palau because America gives them money, and America and Ukraine voted against it because they saw that as an attack on Ukraine in that particular region, a political attack on them to limit freedom of speech and expression. So it's a political attack on, regardless of the political attack, what did it say? We're combating neo-Nazism and xenophobia, but we're going to vote against that. The other 136 countries voted for it, so it actually went through. So it shows you where Ukraine is at this moment in time, and I don't see how Zelensky all of a sudden is being spoken about at the Nobel Peace Prize and what an honorable man he is, because I know what Ukraine's like, I know what the government's like, I know who they're supported by, but of course propaganda, and that's what I talk about, conditioning, because we assume that all of this negative propaganda in Russia is because it's propaganda, trying to lie to the people, but we believe everything we're told. Now, as I say, I completely am with the people who are suffering. Completely, the people who are suffering. The Ukrainian people are suffering. Now, once again, we talk about refugees and who are worthy refugees, who's worthy of our empathy as refugees. I've got 5 or 6 of my friends who are taking people from Ukraine in, and thank God, good, these people are suffering, take them in. I don't think they're taking anyone in from Yemen, Syria, Iraq, places like that, Bangladesh. Oh, but it's not, it's different because this is a war. I said, forget about whether, Russia doesn't say it's a war, it's a special operation, but regardless, forget about the dynamics of what it is. Look at the people who are suffering and say, are they suffering more than them? And these are the people who have empathy with. Forget about the reasons why they're suffering. They're suffering. They're suffering. I don't think anybody will take in anyone from Yemen or Iraq or Syria. And why is that? Do we need to say why it is? And we know what it is, regardless of very much like the talk about taking in or not. Oh, it's because of Marxism, it's because of this, it's because of whatever. Oh, it's because of, no, it's not. It's because they look a particular way. And we understand that. We've been conditioned to think in terms of hierarchy. Race, gender, class, and these people are more worthy of our empathy than others. Whatever excuse you want to make about because it's Russia or it's because they're coming west and Russia wants to invade France and take over England, which they don't. But this is how propaganda works. So these are the things I'm really interested in having a conversation about, because I have no issue with people feeling that way. Because people will identify with people who they feel are like them. So when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it is a bit of a double-edged sword. And it always has been, because I mentioned the fact of my family where I actually came from. Can we see people as different and equal? That's a question. Because as far as I'm concerned, there's only 2 ways beyond that. Two things to talk about with that. If we see somebody as different, in my opinion, we either see them as inferior or superior. In terms of football management, if you are a European manager rather than an English manager, forget black, English manager, you're seen as superior. So if you come from Spain and no one's ever heard of you, you can get a job in the Premier League because you're from Europe, so we see you as superior. They do. How many European managers come who we've never heard of? I'm talking about the good ones. So many come because we have this perception, oh, they're better than English managers. But of course, if they're coming from somewhere else, from Africa or somewhere, system is inferior. So When people talk about, there's a melting pot theory of a soup, whereby a vegetable soup, whereby you have, and every time I tell this story and I mention tomatoes, someone tells me tomatoes are fruit. Well, we put it in the soup anyway, so I'll call it a vegetable for now. Tomatoes, carrots, cucumbers, whatever the vegetables are, you put them in a blender, you blend them all up, that soup would be lovely. But it doesn't taste of anything individual. It'd be lovely, but it's all mixed and blended, and people say that's great. Rather than the ideology behind having some water with the individual vegetables when they're bubbling nicely amongst themselves, not fighting against each other, but bubbling, complementing each other, wouldn't that be a great way to be? For individuals, regardless of what culture they come from, regardless of the color, regardless of the gender, all getting on together, equally as important as each other, that'd be great. Has that ever happened in history? It hasn't. So, but what we want to do is we want to get them in and say they are equal. Now, what I prefer to talk about and to promote is the commonality and similarity between all human beings. That is something we should talk about. Because if you want to talk about it from a genetic or a biological point of view, if you're going to share more than 95% of our genes, 95%, more than 95%, it's more than that, but I don't want to get it wrong because someone's going to go, you said 98 and it's 97.2, but it's more than 95%. Why are we focusing on the 5% difference to then hold on to that to say we're different? And even from a cultural point of view, we have so many different cultures, and we focus on the differences in our cultures. But I'm going to tell you the similarities in our cultures. I've had 280 flights in the last 3 years before lockdown, going to Afghanistan, India, China, all over the world. And of course, the hub of all of it is Dubai, when you go to Dubai airport. And when I go to Dubai airport, I see people from Africa, from India, from Asia, from Europe. I see people in the airport. And you know what I see? I see everybody, regardless of where you're from, you're pissed off because the flight's late. Your kids are making a lot of noise. You're hungry, so you got to go and get something to eat. Everybody's the same. But we don't hold on to that. We hold on to the little differences, and we say this makes us different, so let's all live together. So the French ideology is correct. As much as in practice it doesn't work, the French ideology is that once you give up your identity, be Muslim, black, whatever, you can be French, which doesn't work because, of course, there is discrimination and racism in France. But the ideology behind it is that if you identify with us because we're all in the same area, you can be French. So there's no official census of how many black people there are because they're all French, which doesn't work in reality. Whereas in England, we will allow people to hold on to their identity. And we say, that's great, because hold on to your identity because it shows that we're accepting of you as much as we're not accepting of you. But you could look at it, hold on to your identity because you'll never be like us. Because we are the dominant group, and whatever identity you hold on will never be equal to us. So the whole idea of diversity and inclusion is great to allow other people, be women, be gay people, to get into these institutions, but I prefer to promote the commonality amongst everybody rather than the diversity.
God, I've got so many questions, but I'm going to stop myself because I'm going to ask if we would need to have questions from the audience. So anybody want to ask John any question?
Liverpool will win the league next year. There you go.
Yeah. It is hoping. It's a long time coming.
I will ask a question after you can hear me. How it intersects with class? Yeah. There you go. He said racism intersects with class, and is it possible to do program on racism in a capitalist state? Now we're getting very deep and very complex, and it is difficult to do that. It is difficult to do that. So, of course, you're talking about from a political perspective. My position is really coming from a human individual perspective. Politics will take care of itself. I am not an anti-capitalist. Do I believe? And as one of the great Greek philosophers said, democracy is one of the worst forms of government, apart from every other one that existed. And in that respect, he's right. Because, of course, there's a book called Race and Capitalism, and he'll explain. And I prefer, that's why it's an intersectional book. You have to look at it from a discriminatory point of view. And a capitalist state has to work by discriminating against the majority. That's what capitalism is, discriminating against the majority. Maybe women, maybe black. Once we get rid of black, it'll be somebody else. Yeah, so that's what has to happen. So unfortunately, that'll be difficult. But just to talk about why I believe we have to do it from an individual perspective, working ourselves individually to talk about the discrimination we have within us, all of us, rather than pointing the finger, is to use the example of one of the greatest men, in my opinion, one of the greatest freedom fighters, one of the greatest fighters for equality, Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi was a great freedom fighter for equality for his people. Because Gandhi came from India, he went to the temple in London as a lawyer, and he knew that he was equal to any white lawyer. So him being equal to any white person made him believe that other Indians like him, be they the untouchables, be they class, whatever they are, has the potential in the right circumstance, in the right environment, to be equal to any white person. So he knows that in the right environment he can because he's done it. Yeah? So he's fighting for equality. Then when he goes to South Africa, to work in South Africa and to live in South Africa, he then sees the way that the Indians in South Africa are treated, and he complains because they're treated in the same way that they're treating those black savages, as he calls them. Now, you can't blame Gandhi because this is the way he's been conditioned to think that black people are savages, they're inferior. So if the great Gandhi believes that because of how he's been conditioned, what chance has the average person got by the lies that have been told about those people? So that is why my thing is not about politics, because that's a whole nother level now, whereby, you know, it's much deeper than what we can go into, and that's a much bigger problem to solve, the political problem, the capitalist problem. But that is why I say that if you look at it from an individual perspective, we can individually make a difference to further down the line as long as we look at ourselves. Because I want to give a message to all black people. Wakanda doesn't exist. I don't know if you've seen Black Panther, where, you know, all the black people are great and they have invisible planes and the whole society is great and blah, blah, blah. When we get rid of racism, homophobia, sexism, other dynamics, negative perceptions of different groups, the vast majority of black people, women, gay people, Muslims, whoever you are, will be exactly where they are. Exactly where they are. But they won't be there because they're black, or because they're gay, or because they're female. They'll be there because as human beings, we have an innate quality to work harder than other people, to be more intelligent in terms of what intelligence is, to try harder. And that's the rewards that we should all get. But at this moment in time, we're not there because our race, gender, class, geography works against us. So once we get rid of those biases, we then believe, a lot of black people believe, once we get rid of racism, we're all going to be great. We're all going to be doctors and lawyers and footballers. And what's holding us back is because it's racism. So of course, race generally does. But from an individual perspective, we have to look at ourselves as well. But that we've got a whole new debate about that capitalist class. I don't want to talk too much about it now because the secret police will come and get me. But
another question? So that guy there, yeah? Just say it, yeah, go on.
And you sound like you're a Scouser. Thank you very much. That's very kind of you. But I didn't do it for people to know. I didn't do it for people to know because I did it because, you know, when people said to me after Hillsborough, you know, did you have to reassess your values? I said, no, I didn't. I never thought football was more important than life and death. I know that that's more important. So a lot of footballers were like, oh, isn't it terrible? And felt sorry for themselves because I was playing. I said, look, I didn't lose any loved ones. I'm here. Whatever the families want, we will do. And secondly, when they asked whether we should play again, because they said, should we play again? I said, I haven't got an opinion. I will be guided by the people who lost their loved ones. If they want us to play, I'll play. If they don't want us to play, I won't play. A lot of players felt that, oh, we should play or we shouldn't play. I said, well, we are not the ones to decide. So I was completely guided by the ones who had lost their loved ones. So when I went to a lot of funerals. If I went to the funeral, and sometimes I'd go and they would say, you know, I would gauge the family's reaction. And I'd see whether they want me to come and sit with them at the front. And if not, I'll just stand at the back or sit at the back. And sometimes they say, come from the front. Sometimes you could see that, you know, in their grief, I'll just stand at the back. But I was completely guided by them. And I didn't do it for anybody to know and, you know, the publicity and stuff like that. So, but thank you for saying that anyway.
Can I follow that up then with another question?
Go on.
Yes.
Liverpool fans got a lot of abuse, really, because Liverpool fans booed the national anthem and they booed the royal family. I thought Klopp dealt with it by saying, very well by saying there must be reasons for that. I wonder what your thoughts were.
Well, first of all, there are reasons for everything, aren't they? There are reasons for everything. And once again, the royal family are coming under a lot of stick and abuse for something that they really didn't have. They weren't the only ones who benefited from colonialism and slavery, by the way. And in fact, from a slavery point of view, the government, that was a private enterprise. Look, when you talk about racism, I'll just talk about racism for a while. Racism, wholesale racism of what we know today is not because of slavery, it's because of colonization. The colonization of Africa, colonization of India, that is when the idea of wholesale racial inferiority and superiority came to the fore. Because when slavery started in 1600, you had white working class people who were considered a different race to the elite anyway. So that whole idea about racism, and that's why it started with slavery, is colonialism. It's colonialism. So of course, from Liverpool's perspective, you do have this north-south divide, you do have this governmental situation, and they may look at, you know, the royal family and feel that Liverpool didn't benefit, but it's not the royal family, it's the government's fault. It's Winston Churchill, it's the government. So the booing the national anthem, once again, I don't see any issue with the national anthem. I think people really have to understand the history, and I think that what it is, it's against the establishment of this north-south divide, whereby people up north, Liverpool particularly, Ireland the same, have been disenfranchised by a government for hundreds of years. And of course that manifests itself, and it is allowed to manifest itself, because the royal family aren't going to come and say anything, so therefore the government is quite happy for the royal family to take all the brunt of the criticism, because it leaves it off them. So as I said, I am not necessarily a royalist. I mean, I'm sure they do good work, they do a lot of good work, and it's not their fault that their forefathers you know, would have raped and pillaged to get what they got, which they have, but hasn't everyone. And if it was my family, do you think I'm giving any of that money back? Would you? And what are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to give it up because of the atrocities that may have been committed? And in fact, it's not the royal family. It is the institutions, the institutions and the governments. Because the royal family in England haven't had any power for 400 years. For 400 years after the English Civil War, they haven't had any power. So it's a bit of a puppet monarchy, if you like, that people focus on. So I would sing the national anthem, because if I'm going to play for England, and I choose to play for England, I can't then say, well, I'm not going to sing the national anthem. I said I'm not going to play for England, if that's the case. And as far as booing the royal family go, I don't have anything about, I mean, you know what Andrew's like, but apart from that, I have nothing against them.
But when it comes to the national anthem these days in football, you did sing the national anthem, didn't you? You sang, you rapped it.
Well, not only that, you know what? And if I played for France, I would sing the French national anthem.
Yeah.
And I wasn't born in France. Well, I wasn't born in England. But because if I choose to represent this and be identified with these people, I'm going to be part of them. I can't have it both ways. I can't say I'm going to play for England, but I'm not going to sing the national anthem. Yeah. You know, so.
But as I was saying, for many of us, you remember that 1990 World Cup, the national anthem, and since then, the national anthem has become, you know, and that image of you. With
well, I should get royalties for it then, shouldn't I? I should make a bit of money from it.
Well, listen, we've come to the end now, actually, I'm afraid, because there's another session coming in straight after this. You know what, we don't see and hear enough from John on. He should be on Match of the Day, Sky Sports, all these things.
I shouldn't. Can I tell you why?
I think I've got to.
You know why I'm not on Match of the Day?
I think I know why you're not on.
You know why I'm not on? Because if they want to then say when we're in Russia and they go, oh, isn't it terrible because those Russians are racist? I say, well, I don't see many black people in these studios.
Yeah.
I know who to point the finger at, and if you point the finger at the wrong people, then you know, and then that's why I call them the Vichy French. Really, it's about the Vichy French. We've got a lot of Vichy French, a lot of black people in these positions, and we feel good as black people because we've got black people in those positions, and nothing's changing for the people down here, and that has been going on from a female perspective, black perspective, religious perspective for hundreds and hundreds of years, and we think it's going to change because we now have a black President Obama, a female chief of police, Kamala Harris, Deputy Prime Minister. We've got a gay Prime Minister in Ireland now, Varadkar. I think they're going to change. That's not changing anything. We have to change the environment that we live in.
Right, well, that's a good time. That's a good thing. I think that's a good thing to end on. So one more round of applause for John Barnes, people.
Thank you.